Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for joining me. Everything you see here is for sale. Reach out to Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com for pricing and purchase inquiries. And remember, we are always looking to build inventory. If you want to sell a watch to fund a watch or just raise some cash, one watch or a full collection, no upper limit on prices paid. If you want to sell a watch or multiple watches, reach out to Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com. Let's jump straight in with a big piece. I promised you a Rolex green bezel, and I intend to deliver Z Series 16610LV. You can see this is a relatively late example of the original green Submariner, launched back in 2003, effectively the 50th anniversary of Submariner, and the first of a series of 3 that brings us to the modern day. This one, of course, is pre-super case, and it has a handsome combination of an anodized aluminum green bezel and a black lacquered dial. Now, the anodized bezel does look very different from today's glossy Kelly green ceramic, so the timepiece has its own unique aesthetic. A feature that's often missed on these first-generation green Submariners is that they had a larger set of indices on their dial. This was the first of the so-called modern maxi dials on the Submariner. It's a feature borrowed from the Yachtmaster of the 90s. Bigger individual plots for the lume, so even if you were to take the bezel off of this one, it would still be distinguishable as a 16610LV lunette vert. Now let's put it on my wrist. As you can see, we're sort of in a transitional period of Rolex design. We've got solid lugs and solid end links, but we still have the hollow center links. Of course, pop open the Oyster clasp. You can see this watch features outstanding physical condition. You can really see how sharp that 5-point coronet as well as the embossed link pattern is. A really handsome, wearable, universally loved piece. You can see on my wrist, it's more compact than the later super case and 41mm super case. The lugs are nicely tapered, no need to pare these down. You can also see that the watch is nicely intact. Look at that bevel. Look at the lug closest to the camera. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it to better advantage. But you can see that the original factory beveling on the edge of the lugs is still largely intact on this example, which makes it a wonderful find. Not quite time capsule perfect, but damn close. You can never restore metal in the sense that you add back volume to a watch. This timepiece needs no such restoration, no polishing, no refinishing, nothing. With the original factory bevel still present, it has all of the character it would have had when it was new. Let's do a lume shot. Okay, as you can see, we are well into the era of super luminova at Rolex, so there is no tritium fade, nor is there any talk of a replacement dial on a Rolex of this vintage. Now, if we want to talk about perhaps alternatives, let's talk about alternative brands. Let's talk about Omega. Can you guess? I think you can. This, launched in 2019, was an evolution of 2018's wholesale redesign of the Omega Seamaster Diver 300 meter. This has that same 42mm case, display case back, 55-hour power reserve master coaxial chronometer caliber 8800, and it has the enamel-filled ceramic bezel insert. But what sets this stainless steel model apart is the use of a white ceramic dial with the signature Omega wave. You can also see that the hands as well as the indices have been blackened for better contrast, and it is a very handsome watch. Throw it on the wrist, there's no doubting it's bigger than the Rolex, though across the wrist it's not huge, at only 50mm lug to lug. It's effectively as broad as the 41mm version of the same watch was. And the reason for that is that the bracelet on this generation features pivoted end links, so that the bracelet can pull straight down out of the lugs. It doesn't fight and flare like the old bracelet did. The bracelet is remarkable, as today's Omega Seamaster bracelets feel as solid and robust as their Rolex counterparts. All solid links, squared off shoulders, doesn't have quite the rounded, rolled, semi-dress links on the outer edge like you found on the 1993 original. That bracelet felt like somewhere between a dress watch and a sports bracelet. This one is more resolutely sporting. Removable links fixed by screws. You've got a half link, and you've got that half link on each side, but you've got other ways of adjusting. There's a push button slider with just under a centimeter of incremental adjustment. You see the push button internally, and then a fold-out dive extension milled from the solid. This is an outstanding watch that offers offers just about everything you could want in a wearable size with a classic design that's already withstood the test of over 1/4 of a century. One more quick look on the case back, because traditionally these Diver 300 meters did not have display case backs. As of 2018, they all do, and you can see the caliber 8800 in there. Anti-magnetic, shock resistant, 55-hour power reserve with a quick set date and hacking seconds, and it is a master chronometer, which means it has been through water resistance tests, winding efficiency tests, power reserve tests, chronometry tests, as well as trials against heavy magnetism. Okay, let's stick with the Swatch group, but let's cross the border and go way up market with Glasuta Original. And this is a model, the Pano Tourbillon XL, that debuted at Baselworld 2007, and it remains just as stunning today. Let's discuss the basics. 42 millimeters in white gold. It's only 13.3 millimeters thick. So while it's a substantial watch, it is thin enough and sloped enough on its flank to fit underneath the dress cuff. Now, getting super close here, you could see that this is a gorgeous flying tourbillon with a wire-style filigree cage for the tourbillon carriage. Note that the entire tourbillon carriage has been black polished, and that the capstone atop the balance staff is actually a cut genuine diamond. It is a 1-minute tourbillon, a flying tourbillon with no upper bridge to obscure your view of the mechanism, and you can see it features an overcoil hairspring, which is an upscale refinement that helps contribute to the regularity of the watch. Now you have a power reserve scale for the 42-hour manual wind power reserve, then you have the time at center, and note, a loomed dial, and then you have a retrograde date. So this is actually a pretty handy watch. It also looks a lot like a New York black and white cookie, and it has more than a passing resemblance to the original 2004 JaegerLeCoultrezeit Gyro Tourbillon. The timepiece wears easily. You can see how it would easily slide underneath the cuff. Quite handsome, hand-finished, from a company that is uncommon to begin with. Watches like this are built in only a few dozen examples per year. Now, taking a quick look at the hardware and the software, you can see alligator leather strap. You can see there is a full white gold deployment clasp with twin triggers and a twin fold. And then on the reverse side, take note, the engravings outboard are done by hand. So you can see the engraving of the name, the hallmarking of the gold, the individual numbering, the water resistance. All of this was engraved with a burin by hand. None of this was mechanically stamped. And as you can see, the movement's gorgeous with a combination of black polished and fired blue screws, pivot jewels set in golden chaton pocket watch style, and then a double solarized ratchet wheel against a black polished click and a click spring that's broad and arced like in the pocket watch era. A truly special watch, and one that is handsome enough and, thanks to lume and a date, handy enough to wear every single day. Remember, it was a German watchmaker, Alfred Hellwig, in the early 1920s who invented the flying tourbillon. It is at home on this watch from Glasuta. Now, flying back to Switzerland and Geneva, this should be your next watch. I'm not kidding you. In the realm of independent horology, I would compare Laurel Ferrier more easily with the likes of Grubel Forsey and Romain Gauthier and Fernand Berthoud than I would to the likes of Moser and F. Pigeon, which are more commonly considered its peers. Finish on these watches is that good. Let me grab my polishing cloth. As you can see, this is the régulateur, a hour, minute, and second separate display on a lovely vertically satin-grained nickel anthracite dial in a 41mm Gallet square rose gold case, all of high polish. The Gallet, of course, referencing the smoothed pebble shape of these watches, whether circular or square, designed to evoke a pebble smoothed by a babbling brook or a river over generations. Now, here is the business end of the Laurel Ferrier. We have a double direct impulse escapement, a 3-day power reserve, a jeweled staff pawl-based winding system with a 22-karat guilloche cut micro rotor. We have a free-sprung balance with an overcoil hairspring, 6, not chronometer style 5 position, 6 positions of adjustment, giving deviation and inaccuracy no place to hide. And the finish here, quite honestly, is better than what you get from Journe and Moser. While I love those brands for their specific assets, which have more to do with regard for the customer and perhaps service availability around the world and style on the dial side, Laurel Ferrier is all about maximizing the technology and the finish on the reverse side of the case. As you can see, the bevels on this watch are a mile wide. You do not need a loop, you do not need optics to appreciate them, and they are rounded and probably finished with gentian wood, as they are truly mirrored and not machined bevels. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, possibly 6 interior angles on this movement and those sharp creases where two bevels meet, that is one of the toughest finishing assignments for an artisan in the business. You'll also note that the entire half bridge for the balance, as well as the structure for the rotor, and all of the screws black polished. The Côte de Genève here are a mile wide, and you can really see, compared to the relatively narrow stripes on the Glasuto, which is impressive in its own right, but this is best in the industry type stuff. So you can see just how broad, luminous, and gradiated these stripes are in color and brightness. This is as good as it gets. We'll throw this one on the wrist, and as you can see, 41 millimeters, but it's very flat, comfortable, organic in appearance, and easily slides underneath the cuff. I think Laurel Ferrier, which makes less than 200 watches a year, really is one of the best buys in independent horology, especially pre-owned like this watch is. You're getting a hell of a lot of fine finish and innovative engineering for your money. I'm going to give F. Vacheron, though, a chance for a riposte. This, of course, is the Line Sport Octasport. Very impressive timepiece. As you can see, big, broad, 44 millimeters, but only about 11 millimeters thick in full titanium. This is the latest version of the watch without the rubber bumpers on the case flank, the crown, and the links themselves. So it's a cleaner look that some folks feel is a little bit more upscale. I liked the rubber bumpers, but you have voted, and you've voted with your pocketbooks, and I am outvoted. This is the look of the future on the links of the future for F. Vacheron. Now, the dial, of course, is illumined, and this is one of the features that sets the Line Sport apart most from the conventional dress watches. As you can see, the individual numerals are solid three-dimensional blocks of luminova that have been applied to the dial. So when it is dark and you do see the lumen, we're going to do a lume shot now, it appears three-dimensional because those numerals have height, width, and length. Okay, we're back with the Octasport, and as you can see, this is a very easy watch to read. Not just the numerals, but also the indices outboard fully loomed. And once again, I'm going to show you, all of those numerals do have height above the dial. Now, of course, the watch is made of titanium, as the Line Sport has been since 2014, but the dial itself, as well as the caliber 1300, they're made of aluminum. So with an aluminum dial and an aluminum movement and a titanium case and a titanium bracelet, you wind up with a very, very, very light, accommodating, and hypoallergenic watch. I should also mention that not only is the aluminum exclusive to the Line Sport models, remember the standard ones are rose gold, but so is this nickel anthracite coating that recalls the glorious limited edition ruthenium watches of the early 2000s. Also mention that 120 hours or 5 days is the chronometric or precise power reserve. The watch will actually run for 160 hours, almost 7 days, if you let it just keep going. A truly handsome and appealing effort from F. Vacheron. You can see some of the details include the power reserve indicator, the flush double-digit grandeur. You have a smoked sapphire for the constant seconds, and then there's an AM/PM indicator. Taking a quick look at something from the other side of Geneva, a sports watch, yes, but about as different from the one you just saw as possible. Here, redoubtable mass is the theme. Full white gold. This is the 116759SA. This one is a Z series, and the timepiece is extraordinarily hefty. White gold bracelet, clasp, bezel, and case. Diamond paved lugs. It was part of a series of jeweled sports watches released by Rolex at Baselworld 2007. Now, as you can see, this is all done by hand. Very few Rolex watches still feature hand craftsmanship, and the gem set models are among the very last. So all of this diamond paving with different sized diamonds, all matched for color and clarity, this is all done by hand. You can also see that the baguettes used on the bezel are also graded for color and clarity so that there's no unintentional gradient from gem to gem. You have a combination of diamonds and true blue sapphires, and a lovely triangular index with an enormous cut gem up at what would be, I guess, 12 o'clock. Now, you could still use the bezel and approximate with it, but this one is more about style than flying for miles. This is a timepiece that is all about the grandeur of gems, gold, and the Rolex name. But make no mistake, it's still a true dual-time watch, even if judging that third time zone with the bezel is going to be a bit of a challenge. You can see here that the green GMT hand has been replaced with a conventional polished white gold hand. I'm able to change the local time independently. You can see the watch is still ticking. The 24-hour hand does not move. Then I've got this hacking seconds function where I can set everything in sync. You can see the watch still has a small touch of color from the standard model in that GMT Master II is printed in green. All of this is still 100 meters water resistant and a chronometer, which means it is both very resilient, you can swim with it, and it is still very accurate. Rolex not really giving up much of the functionality in the transition from luxury sports watch to high jewelry timepiece, and it is truly spectacular. I'd also say that with the combination of diamonds and blue sapphires, this would work if a man has the panache to pull it off. This is not for the timid gentleman, but I can easily see this thing being worn with, I would say, the flair, the raffish flair of a glam rocker. This would be perfect for a group like the Suite. Super cool and absolutely unrepentant and unapologetic. This is Rolex at its brash best. Okay, but let's say you want a sports watch that's just as outrageous in sensibility, but more accessible in price. Well, I give you this Breitling SuperOcean 42. Stainless steel, 500 meters water resistant, 42 millimeters, unidirectional 120 click rotating bezel, plenty of lume, fantastic Breitling Pro 3 strap, and one of Breitling's premium clasps. No clamshell here, this is twin trigger release, and then internally there is a push button slider that allows you to fine tune the fit. Brand new strap, so you'll have the pleasure and privilege of cutting it on both sides to suit. The watch is not huge like other Breitlings are, and you can see on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, and my wrist is 16 for those of you who might be new to the program, this is surprisingly flat, flush, and easy to wear. Now, it is a chronometer, which means it's very, very accurate. And of course, the timepiece isn't excessively broad across the wrist with nicely downturned lugs. So even if your wrist is maybe 14 centimeters in circumference, you can wear this one well. I believe this is called Intrepid Orange. So if you're wondering what this color is called, Breitling wants you to know it is Intrepid Orange, and it is very fetching. It's got a little bit of a Doxa flair to it while being resolutely Breitling in case and bezel profile. Really handsome. Let's do a lume shot. Absolutely no compromise with the Breitling SuperOcean 42. No, this is not the SuperOcean heritage, so it's deliberately modern in its aesthetic. It looks like a dive watch built for the present day, not for 1950 or 1960. All right, we got another lume shot coming up, but first I want to show you by day Godzilla. Godzilla, celebrating his 65th anniversary in 2019, and this is the Grand Seiko Spring Drive Godzilla 65th Anniversary SBJ 405. 650 pieces, 44.5 millimeters in grade 5 titanium. You can see that legendary Grand Seiko tin plate polishing executed on the case externally. This is a hand-finished case, and you can see in particular, and let me remove my fingerprints, that this titanium is alternately curved and creased, satinated and polished, and it is remarkably handsome. A modern-day take on the ancient 62GS polyhedron case. This is bringing that back to the future. This is what it would look like if it were born in the year 2019. Now, on the dial side, you have an explosive red galvanized and lacquered sunburst that's designed to evoke Godzilla's radioactive beam breath. And then you have a sapphire cap over a metallized and fully lumed bezel that looks spectacular at night. Now, the hands and the indices, as well as the logo and the frame for the date, have all been finished by hand by artisans who just create these tiny pieces, finish and facet them all day long. So this is a handmade watch inside and out. And when we turn it over, you can see that the watch features the image of Godzilla, and it is 200 meters water resistant. Here you can see Toho film, 1954 to 2019, 65 years of Godzilla. Godzilla right here, smashing Tokyo. I don't know for a fact that it's Tokyo, but I strongly suspect that this is a municipal building in Tokyo or a Seiko-related building. So I'll have to check to see if that is a true representation. But of course, if Godzilla is going to stomp a city, it's going to be the biggest one in Japan. Now, more notes. This is the caliber 9R15, which means unlike standard spring drive, which is accurate to 15 seconds a month, this one is accurate to 10 seconds a month, and that is because there is a hand-selected and specifically aged quartz crystal used. 3-day power reserve, incredibly accurate, of course, combination of mechanical sole and quartz precision. Here you can see this Godzilla skin. No Godzillas were harmed in the making of this hide. It is an embossed calf, but you can see there's this lovely Godzilla color and, I would say, texture. It's designed to be scaly, and it delivers. It's also substantial. As you can see, you get a lot of leather here. Full deploying clasp, twin trigger release, very secure. An easy watch to wear in spite of its size. I'll show it to you on my wrist. And again, my wrist being fairly small, the watch is going to look a little bit large, but it's reasonably thin, and it actually traces the arc of your wrist quite nice. If you look at it from a distance, the case is shaped like a banana, and that effective camber means it wears a bit like a Richard Mille. Large, but the ergonomics are excellent, and in titanium, very light on the wrist. That's the Godzilla. Let's do a loom shot. There we go. The radioactive glow of the king of monsters. As you can see, this one using a fully loomed bezel because the bezel is capped by sapphires, so the loom cannot be scratched off by abrasion. And I love the fact that they loomed the smooth sweep of the spring drive hand. They loomed the counterweight of the hand. Two mainstays, each of which has decades of history behind it. Let's talk about this model, launched in 2010. This is the IWC Portuguese Handwound 5454, 44 millimeters by about 10.1 millimeters thick. It's broad, flat, and it's a true tribute to the 1939 IWC Portuguese, or reference 325. That model, created at the behest of gentlemen named Rodrigues and Teixeira, was designed for the Portuguese market. They were the importers of IWC watches to Portugal, and they wanted a wristwatch that was as accurate as a pocket watch. And back then, because pocket watch movements were both more accurate and larger, it was necessary to create the first purpose-built oversized wristwatch to contain an IWC pocket watch movement, and this is a tribute to that first reference 325. Now, you can see we have leaf hands, small seconds at 6 o'clock, a railroad track outboard, and then we have vertically arrayed Arabic numerals. The timepiece, much like the Patek Philippe reference 96, retroactively dubbed the first Calatrava, this came out of that same era, the 1930s, when integrated lugs were just coming into fashion on round-cased watches. And you can see that same blended form follows function sensibility here, albeit on a much larger watch, but it is very similar to the 96 in both case and dial design. Now, what sets this one apart, aside from this lovely ardoise or slate gray sunburst dial, is that it continues the tradition of using a pocket watch movement in the Portuguese. You could call it the Portugueser. IWC speaks German in Schaffhausen, Switzerland, and Portugueser would be how they would say it. I speak English, so I say Portuguese, but in any language, this caliber 98-300 is gorgeous, big, broad, at 37 millimeters plus. It's larger by itself than an entire Rolex Datejust. As you can see, it has a pocket watch-inspired three-quarter style bridge jewel set in gold-plated chaton, designed to evoke the pocket watch era and designed to evoke the founder of IWC, American F.A. Jones of Boston. You can see the oversized Jones Arrow Index for fine adjustment. Now, it beats away at 18K, so it's a big, slow-beating pocket watch-like cadence. Manual wind, 46-hour power reserve, and you can see it uses an overcoil hairspring, and it is adjusted in a high horology 5 positions. You can even see that the beveling, though mostly mechanical here, is quite attractive, as is the engine turning on the base plate and the stripes across the bridges. There is a solarization on the ratchet wheel as well as on the crown wheel, and you can see the click and click spring are an extended, almost swan's neck style pocket watch fashion. You could really see that elaborate pocket watch inspired click. Now, of course, because it beats big and slow, the seconds hand chugs along like a pocket watch. This is a watch that's fun to hold up against your ear. It also has an enormous hacking lever. You can see the hacking lever right underneath the center wheel. When I pull the crown out, you can see it breaking the balance wheel. You can also appreciate just how huge that balance wheel is, as it's almost the radius of the movement in diameter. It's truly huge. Let's throw this on the wrist. Although the watch is broad, the profile is flat, and the lugs are relatively stubby and tightly downturned. So though the look is big, the fit is comfortable, and the watch is wearable on a wrist smaller than mine. And once again, if you're just joining in or you fast forwarded to your favorite watch, my wrist is 16 centimeters in circumference. And again, this watch is very, very flat. The Vacheron Overseas, redesigned Generation 3 for 2016. 2 years later, they gave us perhaps the most charismatic dial in the Overseas collection, which is this lovely, lush, gloss black. Now the watch itself, 41 millimeters and quite slender as you can see, is a potent piece, but when you add the white gold hands, indices, Vacheron logo, and the black dial base, it becomes just a bit more powerful. It has gravitas, it has presence. If it were alive, it would have pathos and logos as well, as its logical and emotional appeal overwhelm me. It's a watch that is logical because it fits well and it's easy to size. A huge range of wrists can wear this watch well. My tiny wrist can wear it well. It's capable of being your sports watch at 150 meters water resistant. It's 25,000 ampere per meter anti-magnetic, making it still more practical. It's automatic winding and fully loomed with a 60-hour power reserve. And as you can see, the bracelet comes with 2 straps, one rubber, one leather, and there's a quick release system. You can swap out if you want a more rugged or you want a more upscale look, or if you just want to clean everything closely, that's easy to do. The watch even comes with a separate deployant clasp that allows you to quickly outfit the rubber and the leather straps, which are in black to match the dial. Now, taking a quick look at this bracelet, you can see that every individual link is removable. I remember I said this was a logical choice. If you want to pick this watch, it's emotional, yes, but it's also logical. Being able to size and remove every single link on both sides of the bracelet means you have a lot of flexibility. There is also a micro adjustment, 1.5 millimeters, built into each side of the clasp, so you really do get the ability to fine-tune that fit. And of course, it's beautifully finished. You can see the polished inner facets of the links, and they're finishing those components where it's barely even visible, the ultimate sign of integrity. Satination across the top, a nice rolled bevel along the flank, and polished outer faces. Everything about this watch is appealing right down to the movement. For the Generation 3 of the Overseas, we get an in-house caliber, and for the first time, display case backs, and we do not sacrifice the water resistance or the anti-magnetic qualities of previous versions. The rotor, if you look, has satination, polish, chiseling, and media blasting. This 22-karat mass, not 21, not 18, 22-karat mass, has been finished by hand in 4 different styles. Compass rose motif, you can see that the anglage on the edge of the bridge it's bright, it's rounded, it's real, it's not machined. It may have been started by machine, as most anglage is today, but it's finished by hand to create that mirrored shine. We have lovely Cote de Genève, we have a black polished regulator cap, engine turning on the base plate, and every single screw is black polished on its head and chamfered on its circumference and its slot. And of course, you can see the Poinçon de Genève on the movement, but also on the case. As since 2012, it has become a full watch evaluation. It represents the whole watch, not just the movement. Let's do a quick loom shot, because this is worth it. Vacheron chooses blue loom, and I happen to agree. As you can see, a lot of color, but also a lot of luminescence at night. This one's an easy one to read. A lot of dress-style watches don't pack enough loom. With Vacheron, though it is a dress watch company, it absolutely nailed its third pass at a sports watch. And that is the 2018 dial. Also launched in 2018 from Ulysse Nardin, the Freak Out. What's new? Well, a lot. For one, 45 millimeters in titanium. This was the first time that the Freak was available in a base metal, making the watchmaking, the technology, the look and the character of Ulysse Nardin's most famous watch more accessible and without compromise. This is no Freak with a crown. It's not a down market play for money at a more accessible price point. It is still a watch that retailed for $40,000, and you're getting everything you expect on a Freak. You're getting the carousel tourbillon on the dial. What's the difference between a carousel and a tourbillon? Mostly that the carousel, invented in the 1890s by Dane Bonabonickson, is designed to be more durable and shock resistant. One drivetrain drives the escapement and one drives the carriage, which is why when I unlock the bezel, and the bezel sets the watch, but when I unlock the bezel by lifting that tab, I can move it without crashing the escapement. And that's because the powertrain for driving the carriage does not go through the escapement. With the carousel, there is a separate powertrain for the baguette style movement, which is also the minute hand, and for the escapement. Now, you'll also note the thoughtful use of silvered wheels in the drivetrain and clear sapphires rather than synthetic rubies with that ruby red tone. It better matches the look and character of the watch. Now, if you look at the balance, you can see it's free sprung with a recessed bolt balance that's aerodynamic and also proprietary. It has a hairspring in silicon, as well as twin escape wheels in silicon, and that's unlubricated and anti-magnetic. Now, what sets this apart is, unlike most brands which have to buy their silicon technology, Ulysse Nardin, via its Sigatech subsidiary acquired in 2006, makes its own silicon components, making it effectively independent of the mainstream sources of silicon in the industry, which are principally controlled by Rolex, Patek, and they also have, I believe, buy-in from Richemont. I believe that was the third collaborator in the mainstream silicon project. Now, the timepiece, as you can see, is lovely in Ulysse Nardin blue, and it's also loomed. But let me show you how this works, because you might not know, if you've never seen one of these, how to tell time. Right now, it is 1:30. See how the minute hand, which is also the movement, is pointing down at 6? And you can see how the hour hand is between 1 and 2. And now it is 2 o'clock. Now, there's more to it than that. It has a 7-day power reserve, and it is wound using the case back. As you can see, you wind the case back, and you wind the watch. 7-day power reserve, and you've got a window into the mainspring that allows you to see effectively how tightly coiled it is, and the longer you own the watch, the better you become at using that as an effective power reserve indicator. Throw it on the wrist, and though it's a 45, it's easy to wear. It's comfortable, it's nicely tapered, it's not even too thick, because it's about 14 millimeters thick. So while it's not a dress watch by any means, it's extremely comfortable, and it's not going to get hung up on most cuffs. Let's do a loom shot. I told you, there is loom on this watch. It's also, at 30 meters, one of the few freaks ever made that has any measure of water resistance. Let's talk independent horology, starting with the Debaton, a company that I love out of Lauberson, Switzerland, in the Swiss Jura Mountains. They make 150 watches a year, and since their founding in 2002, fewer than 3,000. This is the DB25 moon phase, and there's a lot to love. First, you have the fired Cosmos, you have the spherical moon phase, the fired Cosmos, as well as the handset center in titanium, a patent that Debaton has on firing titanium to oxidize it blue. Now, the moon phase, you can see, is 1/2 blued steel, 1/2 white palladium, and it is spherical. It also has a correction interval of over 1,000 years, so set it and forget it. Debaton, like the better independents, especially FP Journe, makes its own dials, which it cuts on true rose lathes, so this is real, not stamped guilloche, and they make their own cases. And you can see that the DB25 here in 44 millimeters uses conventional lugs. If you don't like the Starfleet Command bridge design of the open dial DB28s, and you don't like the floating articulated lugs, the DB25 is the model line for you. Now, you still get all the Debaton watchmaking, and you'll note, in spite of the technology, you still get very traditional finish. You get Cote Debaton, and if you look carefully, you can see that the dark crest of the waves, it's actually pointed inboard on both sides because they reverse the direction of the roller drum that lays down the stripes for each side, so that the stripes themselves always have their light faces pointing outward and their darker faces pointing inward. You can see that there's an anchor for the springs that protect the outer faces of the balance bridge. You have 1, 2, 3 shock protection springs. That's called triple parachute, and it's patented. But you can see that the whole spring anchor above has been black polished in the tradition of poly noir, creating an optically smooth mirrored surface using diamond paste as a finisher. You can also see that the anglage on the barrel bridge is a mile wide. This is traditional Swiss beveling and chamfer, probably started mechanically the way almost all anglage is today, but importantly finished specifically with gentian wood. The twin barrels give the watch a 6-day power reserve, and they are self-adjusting and lined with sapphire for minimal internal friction. And yes, that's patented. A patented balance that is a solid disc of silicon with a white gold rim to maximize the mass in the rim of the balance for better timekeeping and shock resistance. The fact that the watch has triple shock resistance makes it tough, but it's also there for the sake of chronometry, recentering the balance staff as quickly as possible. Proprietary silicon escape wheel for low friction, a power reserve indicator down at the base right below the balance, and you can see that there's a 2-part hairspring shaped by hand and clamped together, giving the watch the concentric hairspring breathing qualities of an overcoil, but without the thickness and shock susceptibility of an overcoil. and you throw it on the wrist. In spite of the fact that it is a 44, it wears flat, comfortable, and not too broad across the wrist. I could really wear this well. You can see the farther away from the camera I get, the more proportional it looks as you see the rest of my arm. This is a good fit, even if your wrist is as small as 15 centimeters circumference. And a truly special watch again. Debaton making 150 a year. Not of that model, all watches combined. Here is a 100-piece 2019 launch in stainless steel, 40 millimeters and only 10.9 millimeters thick. This is the H. Moser & C Endeavor Center Seconds Concept Blue Lagoon. If you've heard of the Moser Fume dials that fade from bright color at the center to almost black at the edge, this is that. There, of course, is a broad range of colors. They also have the purity dials, which have minimal indices and printing, and then the concept dials, which are entirely unadorned, and this is that. As you can see, Moser, they don't stamp cases. They actually machine and then they hand finish. So they get deep into the case manually once it's machined in step one. And manually finishing off the machine shape is how you get these dramatic tucks and hollows with concave mirror polish. This isn't possible with a mass-produced stamped movement like you'll find at Rolex or Breitling or Omega. The ability to contour a case like this is an advantage from the more laborious, expensive, and time-consuming process of machining and then hand finishing. Now around the back, it's a sports watch movement. 3-day power reserve, manufacturer HMC 200. A lot to love in terms of how it's decorated, but you can also see that with a full balance bridge and a free spring index, this was designed like a sports watch movement for shock resistance. Moser makes its balances, its hairsprings, and its escapements via its precision engineering subsidiary, so they are truly building the entire movement. Bidirectional winding, as you saw with stop seconds, you can see that there's media blasting and satination on the rotor, as well as a lovely double-crested Côte de Genève across the bridges, and there's more than a nod to the pocket watch era of Moser watches in the three-quarter style architecture of the primary bridges. Throw it on the wrist and the watch is more compact than it looks at first glance. 40 millimeters and narrow across the wrist. It has a tremendous drama to it, but it's also discreet, easily sliding underneath the cuff and wearable on a wrist as small as 13 centimeters in circumference. It's got a lot going for it. Probably my favorite watch on the show today. Okay, F. Pigeon, an early F. Pigeon at that, with a case stamped 2003. This is the F. Pigeon Octa Calendrier, a annual calendar, 38 millimeters in platinum, with a matte rose gold dial. It features a lovely array of discontinued features. First, the 38 millimeter case, discontinued 2015. Second, the annual calendar complication, discontinued 2014. Third, the brass movements, discontinued in 2004. Fourth, the Eleanor-made Parisian assembled cases. These cases were made by Eleanor outside of Paris and shipped to Switzerland up until about 2008, because that is when Journe bought Eleanor and moved it to Geneva to become Boîtier de Genève, his case factory. So these early French-made cases feature both French and Swiss hallmarks, as well as the Eleanor Maker's Mark. And again, that was discontinued in mid-2008, the Eleanor Mark. You can see right here, it's also stamped 03, the case's year of manufacture. In about mid-2005, Journe stopped stamping the cases with their year of manufacture. The brass movement is gorgeous. You may ask, why is it silver if it's brass? Because it's rhodium-plated. Traditionally, Swiss brass movements are rhodium-plated for protection against oxidation and contact. And the watch does have the 5 to 7 day power reserve I discussed earlier on the more modern Octa. Mechanically, it's a bit different in that it uses a bidirectional winding system instead of the later unidirectional winding. The unidirectional winding took over in about mid-2007, so this is in the bidirectional winding era. And of course, it's easy to set and a fun watch to observe, as it has a retrograde date and an annual calendar that need be adjusted only once per year during the jump from February to March. We're almost at annual calendar day. Get yours before we reach it. Now, my sentimental favorite might be the Blue Lagoon, but in terms of heart and mind, it's got to be the Zeit Frach. Now, I'm going to show you the jump in a second because I'm actually going to roll it back. That's the fun thing about the Zeit Frach. There's a quick set. When this watch debuted in 2009, it immediately changed perceptions of a Lange und Sonne, which was always considered to be a sort of pocket watch nostalgic purveyor of ultra haute de gamme finish, but very conventional and orthodox machines in appearance and style. And all of that was true, but the Zeit Frach revolutionized what a Lange could be. It immediately won the GPHG Aiguille d'Or, or the grand prize at the Oscars of watchmaking, and that it accomplished as a German-made watch in a overwhelmingly French-favored competition. So this watch truly blew minds. As you can see, there's the time bridge, the hour, tens of minutes, and single-digit minutes, and what appears to be part of the dial is actually part of the movement. This is part of the caliber L043, and it's been rhodium-plated so it's not gold like the rest of the nickel copper zinc alloy on the reverse side. Now you see, at the turn of 60, it's going to jump the hours, the minutes, and the tens of minutes, and it is absolutely electrifying to watch that. It has hacking seconds, which is not universal on jump hours, and a power reserve indicator. The black part of the dial is actually made of sterling silver that's then galvanized black, and this is probably the best version of the Zeit Frach, the iconic white gold black dial 42mm version. Turn it over, you have caliber L043, and there's a lot to love. First, you can see the energy goes in, and you can see some of the train from the winding system gearing down to a barrel in which the mainspring is so strong that one half of it is actually anchored to the base plate. That's how much power and energy it takes to jump this thing. Now, the energy first jumps the minutes, and then it heads downstream to like a pinwheel, and that's the best way to describe it. There's a little pinwheel under my finger here that acts as an air brake to slow down the transmission of energy. There is then a steel bridge, and you can see it right here, with a second locking lever in the middle, and then two third wheels with a hairspring between them. That hairspring every minute takes a burst of energy after it's used to jump the minutes, and then the energy in that hairspring drives the escapement, which beats away at 18,000 vibrations per hour. The result is that monstrously powerful mainspring never directly drives the escapement. So balance amplitude is almost completely even from maximum wind right up until the black polished Maltese cross stopworks halts the watch. So in spite of the huge pulsations of power to jump the time, the balance retains constant amplitude until the watch stops. It's also adjusted in 5 positions like a chronometer, has an enormous amount of inertia, and as you can see, it uses an overcoil hairspring, which is a fine refinement not commonly seen on Lange watches, but this is a special piece. Freehand engraving on both the escape wheel cock and the balance cock, and you can see black polish on the cover of the escape wheel as well as the swan's neck regulator. We have both black polished and fired blue screws. You don't have to compromise, you get both. You get the freehand engraving, which is done with a burin, and of course you can see there is a mirrored anglage on the edge, not just of the nickel copper zinc bridges, but also on the stainless steel bridges, and that is truly difficult to accomplish. No compromise, however, for this piece. What else do I love? Well, I love the glasuta stripes across the bridges. I love the satination on the wheels and the top of the mainspring barrel, and I love the engine turning or perlage on the base plate. This watch is both a technical virtuoso and a design tour de force that remains highly wearable even on a smaller wrist. You can see I love this piece, and it's probably one of the last luxury group products that's still on my list of grail watches and future targets. Guys, if you like what you see, reach out to me directly, Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details, or if you want to sell a watch. Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.